Today we are talking about balance tuning because it is hot off the oven from the kitchen of Season 2's 11.1 PTR. We have new balance tuning changes, by the way, already live in the PTR, so you can already log in and test all of these changes. We can start first with all of this excitement just to talk about a nerf, because Frost Death Knight is getting their tier set in particular nerfed. Now, admittedly, their tier set was very strong. However, it's not that Frost DK itself was doing particularly well, at the very least, of course, basing on the PTR testing of the bosses, but even in the Mythic Plus testing, Frost DK wasn't doing particularly great. What was being great though was their tier set, because their damage of Frost Sight was, on the 10-ish% at the very least when it came to AoE damage. It was quite high. And you would say, well, that's because it's AoE, right? Frost Sight hits multiple targets, so it's gonna do a ton of damage in multiple targets. But even if you went for an heroic raid testing fight, Frost Sight, even on primarily mostly one target, was still doing a ton of damage. And just to be clear, those are free Frost Sights. If you go and look at the casts and you wonder, how many Frost Sight do you have to cast to do that much damage? The answer is 0, because Frost Sight is the one that is being cast for free thanks to your tier set, and that's what gets nerfed pretty much. The winning streak from your tier set stacks up to 6 times instead of 8. The Frost Sight effectiveness that is being cast for free has been reduced to 30% instead of 50, as well as the other free procs of Frost Sight being reduced from 125% effectiveness to 100, as well as 50 to 40 on the primary target. That's basically it for Frost DK, having less damage from their tier set. Not really any changes to Unholy or Blood, or even really not that many for Druid. This was already expected, it just wasn't working beforehand, the changes to the mastery of Resto Druid. We have our first very big positive change. This one is to Preservation. It's gonna be also a good throughput change, but in particular this will be a good QoL. First one, your tier set now works with echoed Verdant Embraces. This is great because your tier set, as all of the healers, you have your chances to apply a hot to your target when you heal, fine, whatever. The big one is the 4-piece. Verdant Embrace always grants insurance, the hot, to you and to your target. Now, what makes this great now is that you can now go and use Temporal Anomaly to then use 4 or 5 echoes and then Temporal Anomaly again. So now you have about 15 players marked with echo. What happens now is that if you Verdant Embrace and you basically heal all those 15 echoed targets with Verdant Embrace, now they will also get insurance, because now it works with echoed Verdant Embraces. So now you can spread those insurances upwards of some 15 or even 20 players thanks to your echoes, which is very, very powerful. Now, obviously, as a result, because now insurance can heal so many more targets, the base healing of your insurance has been nerfed by 30%, which is more than fine, given that now it works with echoed Verdant Embraces. The other major QoL for Preservation is Emerald Blossom may no longer be echoed. This is very good because Emerald Blossom is terrible in the sense that you don't want to have it echoed. The power of Emerald Blossom is casting the actual spell itself, not to have part of that heal be duplicated by echo. You want the actual spell to be cast because you want the fluttering seedlings to fly off. The more of these fly off, the more chances you have to spawn a brand new Emerald Blossom, which is going to spawn even more seedlings, which have even more chances to spawn even more blossoms. And the more blossoms you spawn, the more chances you have to create multiple instances of Cycles of Life, which is basically a Cloudburst totem. It stores a bunch of healing before blowing up. So duplicating some of this healing into an echo was practically worthless. It healed for very little and it was breaking your attempts at creating large echo buildups for your Dream Breath, even for your Spirit Bloom, or even for your Verdant Embrace and things like Communion. Right, so now with this QoL you are now able to use Blossom while playing around echoes. So suddenly entire builds which completely ignored Field of Dreams, completely ignored Seedlings, completely ignored Cycle of Life, because you were playing with Echo, now you can play with these. Now you can play with these because you can play with Emerald Blossom. You can, for example, focus all of your Essence Bursts, all of your free Essence spenders, you can now just use them for Blossom if you have the talent points to spend to go all the way up here. It's definitely freeing up way more options to play when it comes to Preservation Evoker. Now, Hunter This might look like a long list of changes for Hunter, it actually isn't really. Many of these are just visual updates because of the rework. Many of these are going to be bug fixes because of the rework, and then this one we already know about. The Unbreakable Bond giving you access to your pet again when you are playing marksmanship. Same for Beast Mastery, who doesn't really get much of any changes besides more damage to explosive shot in their build. The actual major changes are going the way of survival. Blizzard is trying for the 27th time the same thing. At this point it's a deja vu. They are trying to do the same thing again. They are trying to make survival hunters look slightly less like this when it comes to the spells they are casting, but more in general, just the damage they are doing, and be less focused around Wildfire Bomb and try to make you cast a few more of basically the other things. So how do they do this? Well, when you're playing particularly in single target, because usually pack leader is what you play in single target, you have less CDR on your Wildfire Bomb cooldown. Generally, when you're playing with Bombardier in all spec builds, basically, you have now one fewer free Wildfire Bomb charge, and then the compensation is just damage increases to Wildfire Bomb. You have a new talent which can stack up the damage of Wildfire Bomb up to 12%. You have another talent which can bring it up to 5% more, and then base damage of Wildfire Bomb also increased by 6%. So now it does more damage, but you get to press it less often. That's basically the change given to survival right now. We now scale back to another major W. This one is the W going the way of Arcane Mage. So we are skipping for now all of this junk and talking about the major things, which are Nether Precision changes being reverted, as well as Ether Vision being removed from the game. So the annoyance with Arcane, which is changing in 11.1, this is the live generic, I think, Mythic Plus build. If you move over to 11.1, it's gonna be broken because a bunch of talents are moving around. What players didn't really like was the removal of the double dip. This happened a while ago. Basically, this happens for pretty much every other spell or even trinket effects that can do something like, for example, your next ability is a guaranteed crit. If you were, say, a Fire Mage, hard casting Pyroblast, and then once Pyroblast is about to be cast, you also insta-cast Fire Blast, both of those abilities would benefit from the same buff, even though technically the buff said your next ability is a guaranteed crit, because those two abilities basically were firing off at the same time, they were both benefiting from the same buff. Now this was cut basically away from Arcane and their dear double dipping with the addition of Ether Vision. So basically it's like, okay, fine, you can no longer double dip Arcane Barrages with this buff, so now you only use this to buff Arcane Blast, but at the very least, after having buffed Arcane Blast, you get Ether Vision to buff your Arcane Barrages right after. Now this entire clunky mechanic is being removed because Ether Vision is dead, and Nether Precision, as mentioned, goes back to their reverted version of also working with Arcane Barrage. However, the current panic, even in 11.1 with the change, the current panic is that in the PTR, for now, the double dip isn't back. So technically now Nether Precision can buff Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrage, but you cannot double dip them anymore, even though removing, for now at least, removing Ether Vision only made sense if, of course, the double dipping is back. But assuming it is coming back, right, assuming it makes sense for it to be back, it will still be a very positive change. That is definitely the biggest of the QoLs going the way of Arcane, the revert of the change of Nether Precision, the removal of Ether Vision. You also get back, I believe this was a tier set, the Intuition free cast practically of Arcane Barrage, which is going to regenerate your max Arcane charges once this procs, as well as more attempts at focusing your AoE talents. You have Arcane Rebound for some more splash uncapped AoE, which is always good because Arcane has very big problems doing large AoE damage because Arcane Barrage can only hit 4 targets. You do have, sure, Touch of the Magi, but you need a bit more than that, so this could be a help, although right now on the PTR this is doing quite little damage. It is still uncapped damage in the end. Also, you have another focus on AoE. Resonance has now been updated to practically be AoE only, because right now it reads that Arcane Barrage deals 10% more damage per target. So even if you're hitting one target, it is still doing 10% more damage, right? But the new version, it says 15% more damage per target it hits beyond the first. So this is only basically usable if you're hitting at least 2 targets. If you're only hitting single target boss in a raid, this is nothing. This does nothing. The other QoL for Arcane is Late Drinker. Now it procs off clear casting instead of Nether Precision. Also, the chance to trigger has been significantly increased as well. But definitely the more positive parts about these whole changes is the revert of Nether Precision, the removal of Nether Vision, as well as the coming back of Intuition, which is also a very good change for Arcane. Conversely though, Fire and Frost are not really getting much of anything. Besides, yes, the already current problem in the PTR, Fire Mage and their combustion duration being a bit too overboard. Now, do not get excited about actually reading Brewmaster in the changes, because it's practically nothing. It's a minor QoL on Purified Chi to stack up in less time. So 6 stacks required instead of 10. That's practically the only thing you are getting as a Brewmaster Monk. Not really much of anything worthwhile either for Mistweaver, Windwalker, Holy Paladin, but Prot does get nerfed. So Prot is our current resident meta tank planned for 11.1, at the very least based on the changes, since no other tanks is getting particularly buffed. If Prot doesn't get nerfed by any degree, then why expect anything to change next season? Well, they are being nerfed. Strength in Adversity, reducing your parry chance by 3% per hit to 5% is very big. This was one of the big damage reduction tools you could have because of basically the amount of times you could stack up this Avenger's Shield parry chance. Now it's being nerfed by quite a bit. Even more utility and general tankiness being nerfed by quite a bit by reducing the cooldown reduction of Uther's Council from 30% to 15%. So all of this, Lay on Hands, Divine Shield, Bop, as well as Spell Warding, now have a 15% reduced cooldown instead of a 30% reduced cooldown. And then also Refining Fire catches some heat by doing 30% less damage compared to before, which is also relevant because, you know, you're like, well, I don't really see Refining Fire here, it doesn't seem to be doing that much damage anyways. That's because it is your main source of damage of your entire spell. So the fact that one single talent is actually out-damaging the spell itself was weird to begin with, and now it gets nerfed. Now, Ret Paladin, you wouldn't say so by the current popularity of the spec, which is, by the way, by and large the most played spec right now, is actually getting buffed by 5% in damage. This is mostly due to Templar. Actually, it is all Templar's fault. You're getting nerfed in Templar because Imperial Hammer itself has its damage reduced by 30%, and then the rest of the kit is being buffed by 5%. So indirectly, basically, if you're playing Paladin and you were playing Imperial Hammer already, well, that's the spec, that's the version of the spec that gets nerfed. Now, there might be the other question, even if you nerf this by 30%, is it even worth to actually try to play Herald of the Sun? For now, the answer is no, you will still be playing Templar anyways, so we will see if after this we will actually be seeing any buffs to the other hero talent of Ret Paladin. Discipline Priest, who has been receiving quite a lot of changes in the PTR, is getting even more now. We even had a video about it, just defining how bad discipline changes were compared to Holy Priest at least. Most of these are going to be very positive. The first one is that Void Summoner has been redesigned, no more cooldown reduction based on your cast type of thing. Now the cooldown is flat. The cooldown of Void Summoner now is very simply cutting the cooldown of Mindbender down to 30 seconds and the cooldown of Shadow Fiend down to 90 seconds, and that's it. This is very good because it still frees you of feeling like you're forced to cast these abilities on cooldown to try to get the cooldown reduction down to as much as possible to begin with. It is not very good, sure, if you wanted to go back to how you played now, you can't get that cooldown reduction back. Now, Mindbender is gonna have a 30-second cooldown, lasts for 14-ish seconds, which means that by the time Mindbender is over, there will be about 16 seconds of cooldown on its tooltip, with the new change of this talent right here, which is still good enough. Also, just to make it very, very clean, now in 11.1, with all of the changes, you will have a 90-second cooldown Evangelism with a 90-second cooldown Shadow Fiend if you take Void Summoner, which can be good if it means you can now stop here without taking these two talents and move them somewhere else. Very good QoL. Priests may now slowly move during Ultimate Penitence and control their landing. Evangelism healing, not the healing during Evangelism, just the new version of 11.1's Evangelism, which does an initial big chunk of healing instantly. That has been increased by 40%. An extra QoL, Pain and Suffering, now on top of giving you more damage, also increased the duration of Shadow War Pain by 2 to 4 extra seconds, as well as even more damage to Shadow War Pain. This is like the 4th time in the PTR Shadow War Pain is being buffed. Finally, you get another smart QoL, even though the ability itself is not that great. At the very least, Smite extending the duration of Unactive Atonement now becomes extending the duration of the lowest duration atonements on nearby allies, so it's definitely now better. And there's also been a very good change to Expiation, not because this talent is now massively powerful, but because the current Expiation was terrible and practically 4 years old, because it increased the damage of Mind Blast and Shadow War Death, except this was pre-rework, pre-putting Mind Blast on like a 20-second cooldown, meaning the value of this talent went down by a lot. Now, instead, it changes. Now it's going to deal damage equal to 200% of the duration consumed from Shadow War Pain. It is likely still trash, but at the very least better than what you had before. Major changes also to Penance. Now Penance has a flat 50% more healing and, more importantly, cooldown of Penance reduced by haste, which is relevant because as a Discipline Priest, you kind of do enjoy stacking haste anyway, so this should be a 2+-ish cooldown reduction, basically for free, given to your Penance. What's the nerf though, to compensate for, well, this massive healing buff? Power of the Dark Side increases the damage and healing of Penance by 30% instead of 50, and Harsh Discipline now gives you 2 more bolts instead of 4 when it is fully stacked. Overall though, these are still very positive for Discipline, especially given how the initial take of the changes were and a few other problems you still have, like Ultimate Penitence still having a 4-minute cooldown without being able to actually, reduce it in any way, and you losing Rapture. You basically only have 1 ramp on a 90-second cooldown to be a strong one, and then Ultimate Penitence on 4 minutes. Your direct heals though are now fatter, even with the buff of Penance. Maybe now you have more value of living in a bizarro world where Discipline Priest is actually healing directly, so directly targeting players to get these massive shields on targets, thanks to these changes down this line of the tree for Discipline. But overall, it's still definitely better than before. Holy Priest, conversely, is getting nerfed because many of the things were a bit too powerful. The extra healing of Lightweaver has been nerfed, the splash healing of Trail of Light has been nerfed, and the splash healing of Dispersing Light has been nerfed, and the base healing of Prayer of Healing has been buffed by 20%, with Eternal Sanctity extending Apotheosis by half a second less. Shadow Priest, if you are expecting changes, it's just a bunch of fixes to their tier set, so nothing actually going the way of Shadow Priest, just like nothing really much going the way of Rogue, besides a minor buff given to the tier set of Outlaw. Now for Shaman, Elemental doesn't really get anything besides the QoL of having Arc Discharge now accumulating up to 2 charges. Enhancement, I know it might feel weird right now live to hear that Tempest is being buffed by 15% and Awakening Storms is being buffed by 20%. Well, that's because in the PTR, as we had a video about it, that's not what Shamans are doing, that's not what they are playing with. They are playing with massively heavy hitting Lava Lashes and Surging Totem because of the changes to the spec, the changes of their damage of their Maelstrom Spender. The Lightning build of Enhancement is being nerfed significantly in the PTR, so this is an attempt at buffing it a little bit more, as well as, same reason but in reverse, why Totemic is being nerfed in the PTR. Now, a slight win to my delirious video on the Whispering Waves build of Resto Shaman. The Whispering Waves build of Resto Shaman is actually getting giga buffed. Number 1, Ancestor Healing is reduced, but now they scale with Mastery, so overall this will still be a buff. The actual buffs is that now Ancestors will be casting Healing Wave, something I complained about. When you are casting Healing Wave, they were casting Healing Surge. Instead now, they're casting Healing Wave, which will be stronger in terms of healing, and now Whispering Waves will also duplicate Healing Wave, healing done by your Ancestors. Also, more buffs to the spells themselves as Farseer, because now Maelstrom Supremacy will give you more healing done, 15% instead of 8 to all of these abilities, as well as more healing done to your Riptide. So I will continue down my prophecy line of this meme build actually becoming good in 11.1. Sorry, no real major changes after this. Demonology and Destruction are getting hot fixes to their tier sets. Arms and Protection Warrior are also getting changes to their tier set, and they are both minor buffs. In the case of Protection, actually just a numerical type of buff. The duration of Luck of the Draw lasting 2 seconds more, and the shield charge cooldown reduction being increased. So nothing really major going the way of the Warrior or Warlocks after going through Shaman. So after all of these changes, the biggest one going the way of Resto Shaman's Farseer build, you also had the biggest changes going the way of Discipline Priest, as well as Arcane Mage, Survival Hunter, as well as Preservation Evoker. These were all being more or less pretty positive changes, unless in the case of Survival you just enjoyed spamming Wildfire Bomb that much. In that case, then it would be a pretty negative change. But for now, these are all of the combined changes in the PTR. Of course, as mentioned, since these are already live in the PTR, you can already go in and test them yourself, and then through this following week, looking at the test results of the raid testing as well as the PTR testing of Mythic Plus keys, we will also be able to see the exact, effectiveness of these changes for each of these specs in a more live environment, rather than just the tier recrafting of the balance tuning changes. So for today, on this Thursday, we are now done going through all of the balance tuning plan for Season 2. We're now leaving each other for tonight, starting by thanking everyone for having watched the video, together with, of course, everyone who has been supporting Competi for free by liking and commenting down below, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. Now, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, well, this came pretty late. I was literally ready to go slouch down on my chair and do nothing all evening. Nope, plans cancelled.